In a country that prides itself on freedom and justice, what happens when the very people who swore to serve and protect become blind to their own prejudice? This is not just a story about one woman, it's a mirror held up to an entire system. A system where even a decorated black general, in full uniform, can be thrown to the ground, humiliated, and treated like a criminal, simply because of the color of her skin. What you're about to hear is real. And it demands that we ask, how many more heroes must fall before we finally face the truth? General Olivia Turner had always worn her uniform with pride. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for: justice, honor, and the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. She had been through countless battles, served in war zones where life and death were decided in a split second, but none of those experiences had prepared her for the brutality she was about to face. It started as any normal evening. The rain pattered against the windshield as she made her way home, exhausted from a long day of strategic briefings and difficult decisions. She barely noticed the flashing lights in her rearview mirror at first, assuming they were for someone else. But when the siren blared louder, her heart dropped. She knew something was wrong. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel as she pulled over to the side of the road, her thoughts racing. Was there something wrong with her car? She couldn't imagine what it could be. As she rolled down the window, the officer's voice boomed through the rain, his tone laced with suspicion. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." His words were sharp, forceful, as if they were spoken to a criminal, not someone who had spent her life serving the country. Olivia's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry, officer, but I'm not sure why." Before she could finish, two more officers appeared from the shadows, approaching with their hands on their weapons. The command to exit her vehicle was repeated, more aggressively this time. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She felt a chill wash over her, a sensation she couldn't shake off, even though the rain made everything cold. This was wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen to her. She wasn't just some random citizen, she was a decorated general. But none of that seemed to matter. As she stepped out, one of the officers pushed her roughly, his hands slamming her down onto the wet pavement. She gasped, trying to steady herself, but the humiliation and the raw injustice of it hit her all at once. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from disbelief. She was being treated like a criminal, and all because of the color of her skin. Her mind screamed for action. She had been in situations far more dangerous than this, yet nothing felt as suffocating as this. A surge of anger rose within her, mixed with the bitter taste of frustration. She wanted to fight back, to yell at them, to remind them of who she was, but she knew better. The system wasn't on her side tonight. It wasn't on her side ever. As they roughly handcuffed her, her thoughts were consumed with the glaring reality: no amount of service to the nation, no matter how many lives she had saved or battles she had won, would ever protect her from the prejudice that ran deep in the veins of the law. She was just another black woman in the wrong place, in the wrong moment. And for once, her uniform didn't matter. The cold metal of the handcuffs seemed to dig into Olivia's skin, an uncomfortable, unyielding reminder of her new reality as the squad car doors slammed shut. She couldn't believe it. Her chest tightened, every breath shallow and strained as the vehicle jolted forward, the flashing lights from the patrol cars blurring through the rain-soaked windows. The rhythmic hum of the tires on wet pavement was the only sound that filled the car, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. How had it come to this? She had spent her entire career in law enforcement, putting in long hours, risking her safety, following the rules. And yet, here she was, trapped, accused, and betrayed by the very system she had sworn to protect. Her eyes stared blankly at the reflection in the rearview mirror, her heart racing in her chest. The face staring back at her was unrecognizable. It was her face, but there was a hollow look in her eyes now, betrayal, anger, confusion all playing across her features like a twisted kaleidoscope. She had always prided herself on being composed, on being the steady hand in the chaos. But now, there was nothing steady about her. Her world was unspooling, thread by thread. The sound of the officer's muttered words reached her ears, but they didn't make sense. They were muffled by the pounding of her pulse in her temples. She could feel the officer's eyes on her in the rearview mirror, though he didn't dare speak to her directly. She could sense his unease, his discomfort, but there was no empathy there. Just a coldness, a distance, as if she was no longer a person to him, but a problem to be dealt with. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, the tension in her muscles palpable, but she kept her body still. The last thing she needed was to give in to the fury that roiled within her. She had always been the calm one, the one who kept her head in difficult situations. But today was different. She had tried to stay calm when they first accused her, when they slapped those handcuffs on her with barely an explanation, but now, the anger was starting to rise. They had no idea what they had just done. No idea what it felt like to work your entire life towards something, only to have it ripped away by the very people you trusted. The same system that had promised justice had just turned its back on her. She was no longer a protector of the law. She was a prisoner of it, accused of something she didn't even understand. She was a black woman in a broken system, and that, in their eyes, was all that mattered. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, but the sharpest pain was the betrayal. The cold sting of knowing she had never been seen for her skill, her dedication, her intelligence. She had always fought twice as hard to prove herself, to show that she deserved a seat at the table. And now, she was being treated like a criminal, as if everything she had worked for was meaningless. All of it, her efforts, her service, her commitment to doing what was right, reduced to nothing. The car seemed to move slower with each passing second. She was trapped in her own mind, replaying the events over and over, trying to make sense of it. But the more she thought about it, the more the anger started to shift into something darker, despair. The truth was that she knew how this would end. She would be processed like anyone else, thrown into the same system she had once believed in. She would be just another statistic in a system that had failed her, and failed so many others. As the car pulled into the station, the officers gave her little regard, roughly ushering her out of the vehicle. She stumbled on the wet pavement, her legs unsteady, the handcuffs digging deeper into her wrists. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking her through, but she barely noticed it. She was numb, her emotions too tangled to focus on anything but the suffocating weight of her situation. They led her through the doors of the precinct, and for the first time in her life, Olivia felt small. She had faced dangerous criminals, powerful enemies, but nothing had ever made her feel as powerless as this moment did. The officer's eyes never met hers. She was no longer the brave officer they had once respected. She was just another person to be processed, just another woman of color to be dismissed. As they pushed her into the holding area, she caught a glimpse of herself in the glass doors, her face tired and drawn. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger. She didn't recognize herself anymore. She had fought for years to break barriers, to rise above the limitations that others had set for her, but now, all of that seemed irrelevant. She felt like she was fading away, like she no longer existed in the way she once had. The weight of the injustice hit her harder than anything physical ever could. She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of hopelessness that was threatening to overtake her. Olivia Turner had spent her life standing tall in the face of adversity. She wasn't going to let this moment define her. She wasn't going to let them break her. But even as she thought that, a part of her couldn't help but wonder if the system, the very system she had pledged her life to, was too far gone to save. Olivia sat motionless in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, her back pressed against the unforgiving concrete. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, casting long, unnerving shadows across the sterile walls. The room felt like a cage, but it wasn't the concrete walls that held her captive. It was something far more insidious, the crushing weight of betrayal and uncertainty. Her hands were trembling, but she willed herself to stay still, not allowing the panic to take root. She had faced danger in the line of duty before, but this was different. This wasn't a confrontation with an armed suspect or an unpredictable criminal. This was a war against her very identity. A war waged by the people she had trusted, by the very system she had dedicated her life to. And right now, she didn't know who her allies were or where the fight would take her. Her mind was racing, but it felt like every thought collided with the next, creating a storm of confusion. The charges against her were unthinkable: corruption, conspiracy, but in the back of her mind, something screamed that none of it made sense. She had always followed the rules. She had prided herself on being a part of a system that, despite its flaws, had always kept her grounded in a sense of purpose. But now that sense of purpose felt like a cruel illusion. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a shaky breath, trying to find some semblance of calm. This isn't me, she thought fiercely. This isn't who I am. But the doubt gnawed at her insides, relentless and invasive. Could she have missed something? Could she have been blind to the rot that had quietly settled beneath the surface of the life she had built? Was she really capable of the crimes they accused her of? The questions weighed heavily on her, and no matter how hard she tried to push them away, they lingered, like ghosts haunting the edges of her thoughts. The sound of footsteps approaching broke her from her spiraling thoughts. It was rhythmic, deliberate, footsteps that belonged to people who knew exactly what they were doing. Olivia tensed, her pulse quickening as the door to her cell creaked open. 2 officers stepped inside, their presence as cold and commanding as the walls surrounding her. The woman, younger but with a hard edge in her eyes, didn't even acknowledge Olivia as she walked in. The man, older, with graying hair at his temples, had an air of quiet authority. He said nothing at first, but the silence between them was deafening. It was a silence filled with accusation, with judgment. Olivia raised her head, trying to meet their gaze, but the sharp intensity of their stares made her feel small and exposed. They weren't just looking at her, they were examining her, dissecting her every move. She felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't in years. There was no escape here. She was no longer the officer in charge, the one who gave orders. She was just a woman, trapped and alone, under the weight of allegations that threatened to shatter everything she had worked for. The man spoke first, his voice low and methodical. "Olivia Turner," he began, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're facing serious charges. We need you to cooperate." Her heart skipped a beat. The words landed like a punch, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Serious charges? She wanted to scream that they had it wrong, that she was innocent, that this was all a mistake. But she knew better than to show weakness. The more she revealed, the more vulnerable she became. So, she swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to speak. "What charges?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She hated how small it sounded, how much she was trying to hide the panic seeping into her chest. "What are you accusing me of?" The woman officer stepped forward then, her eyes hardening as she met Olivia's gaze. "Corruption. Conspiracy," she said, her voice cold and clipped, as if the words themselves were something vile she couldn't wait to spit out. "We've gathered evidence that links you to a number of illegal activities." Olivia's breath hitched, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to tilt. "Corruption?" Her mind screamed in disbelief. This couldn't be real. She had built her career on integrity, on fighting for justice. She had worked long hours, taken risks, and made sacrifices. She had never once crossed the line. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed to say, her voice shaking, but she forced herself to look them in the eye. "I've done nothing wrong." The man's expression didn't change. "You expect us to believe that?" he asked, the sarcasm dripping from his words. "After everything that's come to light? You're not the victim here, Olivia. You're part of the problem." Her stomach churned. The accusation hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of her. Part of the problem? She could hardly comprehend it. "What have they done to me?" The officer's words echoed in her mind, growing louder, more insistent. The weight of their words, their judgment, crushed her from all sides. The system she had trusted was crumbling, and she was being swept up in the debris. She wasn't just under suspicion, she was already guilty in their eyes, and they were determined to make sure the world saw her that way too. She fought to keep her composure, to cling to some semblance of control, but it was slipping away. She had worked so hard for so long, and now it was all being torn down, piece by piece. The years of dedication, the countless lives she had saved, the badge she wore with pride, it all seemed so meaningless in the face of this relentless accusation. "Look, I don't know who's behind this, but I'm telling you, I'm not involved in anything you're accusing me of," Olivia said, her voice cracking with the force of her conviction. But even as she spoke, the doubt lingered, creeping into her mind like a slow poison. The words felt hollow, like a last-ditch attempt to convince herself as much as them. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, before the door slammed shut with a finality that left her alone once again in the dim light of the holding cell. The sound of her own breath was the only thing that filled the air. Olivia slumped against the wall, her head in her hands, fighting back tears. She had never felt so helpless, so vulnerable. But somewhere deep within her, beneath the layers of fear and doubt, a fire burned. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. She wasn't going to let them destroy everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in. She would fight. She had to. The hours felt like an eternity, each minute stretching out in a blur of frustration and fear. Olivia had tried to hold on to her composure, but the suffocating silence of the cell was beginning to get to her. Her mind was spinning, the weight of the accusations pressing down on her like a heavy stone. Who was behind this? Who could have possibly set her up like this? The questions kept circling, but no answers came. She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but there was no one here to listen. She was alone, trapped in a web of lies and deceit that she couldn't escape. Her pulse raced as she sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the floor. Her hands were clenched into fists, the knuckles white from the tension, and her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every time she closed her eyes, all she could see was the image of her career slipping away from her, her hard-earned reputation, the years of service, all reduced to nothing in the blink of an eye. The walls of the cell felt as though they were closing in on her, and she could almost hear the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "No. I can't let this break me. I can't give up now." The thought came like a cold slap across her face, a reminder of the woman she used to be, the one who refused to back down, the one who would do whatever it took to fight for justice. But now, in this cold, sterile room, she felt small, powerless. How could she fight back when she didn't even know who her enemy was? How could she trust anyone when everyone around her seemed like a potential threat? Just as the darkness of her thoughts began to swallow her whole, the door to the cell creaked open. She tensed immediately, her body instinctively pulling back, every muscle on high alert. A single officer stepped inside, his eyes scanning her quickly, but he didn't speak right away. Instead, he just stood there, watching her with an unreadable expression. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of suspicion, but then she caught the faintest trace of weariness in his face, the way his shoulders slumped ever so slightly. He wasn't here to make demands, at least not yet. "Olivia," he finally said, his voice low and calm. It was a voice she had heard 1,000 times before, but this time it felt foreign, unsettling. "We need you to cooperate." She froze. Cooperate? She had been cooperating all along, if you could call it that. She had answered every question, given every ounce of information she could, and yet here she was, alone, accused of crimes she didn't commit. She stared at him, her gaze hardening. "I've cooperated enough," she replied, her voice sharp despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "And yet, here I am. What more do you want from me?" The officer didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering as he took a step closer. "This isn't just about you anymore, Olivia. There are bigger things at play here. Bigger things." Her heart skipped a beat. The words hit her harder than she expected. What could be bigger than this? She had already lost everything, her career, her reputation, her freedom. What else was there to lose? He took another step closer, lowering his voice as if trying to convey the gravity of the situation. "There are people's lives at stake now. People you don't even know. People who are completely innocent, but who could be dragged into this because of the forces working behind the scenes. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than anyone here." His words reverberated in her mind, filling her with a cold sense of dread. Forces behind the scenes? She had suspected something like this all along, but to hear it confirmed by someone on the inside sent a chill down her spine. She thought of the people in her life, the ones she had trusted, the ones who had once been her colleagues. Could one of them be involved in this? Could someone she had known for years be part of this conspiracy? The thought made her sick. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling weak beneath her. The air in the cell had grown thick, suffocating, but she refused to let it show. She needed to stay calm, to stay focused. If she let herself crumble now, she would never make it out of this alive. "Who's behind this?" Olivia demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. She was done playing games. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "Who are these people, and what do they want from me?" The officer's eyes flickered for a moment, a brief hesitation before he spoke again. "We don't know yet. But we're getting closer. We need your help to connect the dots." Olivia shook her head, disbelief coursing through her. "My help?" She had been thrown into this mess with no explanation, no clarity, and now they wanted her to help solve it? She had no choice but to go along, but the idea of trusting anyone, let alone a system that had already betrayed her, felt like a cruel joke. "I don't know who I can trust anymore," she muttered, the words barely audible. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to him, or to herself. The officer stepped back, his expression softening just slightly. "I understand. But you need to trust us now. We're all in this together. If you don't help us, it's not just you who's going to pay the price. There are others." Her stomach churned at the thought. What others? But before she could ask, the door to the cell opened again. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she saw Nathaniel Carter standing in the doorway, his face drawn and pale. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of guilt there, like he knew something she didn't. It was him. The one person she had trusted above all others. The one person she had confided in more than anyone. And now, standing in front of her, he looked like a stranger. "Nathaniel," Olivia breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going on?" He didn't answer immediately, just stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes were dark, distant, as though he was carrying some unbearable burden. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy with something Olivia couldn't quite place. "I think it's time we talk," he said, his words loaded with unspoken meaning. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen in place. This was it. The moment she had been dreading. Whatever he was about to say, she wasn't ready for it. She couldn't be. But she had no choice. She had to face whatever came next. Olivia's breath caught in her chest as Nathaniel took a step closer to her. His presence, once a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. The air between them was heavy, thick with the unsaid, and Olivia's heart began to race, each beat thudding in her ears like a warning. He had been distant, his usual warmth replaced with something cold and unreadable. And now, here he was, standing before her, and everything she thought she knew about him seemed to be unraveling. For a long moment, Nathaniel didn't speak. His eyes shifted from her face to the officer standing near the door. The tension was palpable, and Olivia could feel her stomach tighten in a vice grip. Something was wrong, something more than just the chaos of the situation they found themselves in. Nathaniel's silence, his inability to meet her gaze, only heightened the unease building within her. Finally, he took a deep breath, as though he was preparing himself to say something that would break everything wide open. "Olivia," his voice was quieter than usual, strained, laced with an edge of regret. "I didn't want you to be caught in this. I didn't want you to find out like this." Her pulse quickened. "Find out what?" she demanded, her voice rising despite her attempts to keep it steady. She hated the vulnerability in her tone, but the uncertainty that clouded her mind made it impossible to stay calm. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. What was he hiding? He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering toward the door again, his fingers twitching at his sides like he was wrestling with the weight of the truth he knew he had to share. "It's not what you think." His voice broke off, and he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I never meant for this to happen, Olivia. I never thought they'd go this far, but now it's too late. You're in this, whether you like it or not." Her chest tightened. The words felt like a slap to the face, and she recoiled, confusion and anger mixing inside her like a storm. "What do you mean?" Her words came out too sharp, too desperate. "Why are you acting like this? What's going on?" Nathaniel's face twisted with something, guilt, maybe, and his jaw clenched as if he was fighting with himself. Slowly, he stepped forward, lowering his voice as if every word he said was a weight on his shoulders. "I've been working undercover." He paused, watching her carefully, as if gauging her reaction. "I've been investigating the people behind all this, everything that's happening, all the chaos you've been dragged into." A chill swept over Olivia. Her knees felt weak, and she stumbled back a step, almost as if the ground beneath her had suddenly given way. "Undercover?" Her mind was a whirlwind, the words crashing into her with the force of a tidal wave. "He's been lying to me. Keeping secrets. About something so big, so dangerous." Her breath caught in her throat. The betrayal was sharp, cutting deep. You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking. She couldn't stop herself from trembling. "This whole time, you knew what was happening, and you never told me? You let me think I was alone in all this?" Nathaniel's face softened, regret flooding his features, but the apology never reached his eyes. "I didn't want to put you at risk, Olivia. I didn't want to involve you in this." But now, his words trailed off as his gaze darted toward the officer again, who was standing like a silent sentinel in the corner, watching them. "Now, it's too late. They know about you." They're not just after me, they've been watching you, Olivia. You're a target now. The floor seemed to fall out from under her. Her stomach churned, and a wave of panic hit her like a punch to the gut. Target? She couldn't breathe. Every instinct inside her screamed for escape, for safety, but where could she go? What could she do when the very people she trusted, Nathaniel, the officer, everyone around her, had been part of something she didn't even understand? The world had shifted beneath her feet, and she felt powerless to stop it. Why didn't you warn me? Olivia demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Her body shook from the tension, and the pulse in her temples throbbed with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Nathaniel's eyes darkened with a deep, soul-wrenching pain that seemed to pierce right through her. He took another step forward, closer to her now, and Olivia had to force herself not to take another step back. Because I thought I could fix it. I thought I could stop it before it got to you. I was trying to gather information, Olivia. Trying to take down the people behind all of this. He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting her eyes again. But I failed. And now, it's bigger than either of us. It's dangerous, and I can't stop it alone. Olivia's mind was spinning. He had kept this secret from her, not just to protect her, but because he had been part of it, whether she liked it or not. She wanted to scream at him, to lash out, to accuse him of betraying her trust in the most unforgivable way. But beneath the anger, beneath the confusion, something else began to take root, something darker, something she couldn't shake. You should have told me everything, she whispered, the hurt cutting deeper than the words could express. Her chest felt hollow, her breath shallow. We could have fought this together. You didn't have to do this alone. We didn't have to hide from it. Nathaniel's lips trembled, his shoulders slumping as the weight of her words hit him. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice was thick with emotion. I wanted to protect you, he finally said, the words thick with guilt. I never wanted you to get caught up in this, but now, he looked at her, his eyes filled with something raw and desperate. Now, we have to face it. Together. You can't walk away from this anymore, Olivia. You're already in it. Her heart pounded, and she felt the cold sweat bead on her forehead. Every part of her wanted to run, to turn away from him, from the chaos he had dragged her into. But in the same breath, a deep, resolute anger rose within her, anger at him, at the situation, at the cruel hand life had dealt her. Olivia wiped the tears that had begun to spill from her eyes. She would not be weak. She would not cower. Then tell me what we're up against, she demanded, her voice steadying as the rage solidified into something sharper, something more purposeful. What do we do now? How do we fight this? Nathaniel looked at her with a mix of pride and sorrow, then nodded. We fight by taking them down. We take back control. Together. His voice was low but certain, a promise wrapped in defiance. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the fire build within her. She would not let this consume her. Not now. Not ever. Let's do this, she said, her voice unwavering. I'm not afraid anymore. Nathaniel's eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. There was no going back now. The world they had known was gone, and the fight for their lives, for their freedom, had just begun. What happened to General Olivia Turner isn't an isolated incident, it's a symptom of a much deeper wound in America's soul. But her courage, her grace under pressure, and her refusal to stay silent have sparked a conversation we can no longer ignore. Change doesn't begin in courtrooms or police stations. It begins with us, in our homes, in our schools, in the stories we choose to tell. So if her story moved you, share it. Speak up. Because silence, in the face of injustice, is complicity. And together, we have the power to write a different ending.